Hey Rufus, guess what we're going to talk about today? Well, I could just tell you, but that's boring. Let's intro this one game show style. We chose a group of 100 people at random and asked them the following question. What is Rufus most guilty of wasting? What was the most popular response? Rufus. Show me my time. Nothing, this isn't real. That's right, today we're talking about words for time. Now we're going to cover a lot of ground today, vocabularily speaking, so let's just get right into it. We'll start with Millennium and work our way down to second, hitting lots of intermediate stops along the way. Actually, let's see how much you already know. Here are the dozen words we're going to cover in today's video. Time, millennium, century, decade, year, month, fortnight, week, day, hour, minute, and second. See if you can figure out which ones are native English words, that is, they're Germanic in origin, and which ones came into the language through Latin or French. Go ahead, make a little chart. Pause the video if you need to. Got it? Great. Let's start with time itself. Blackboard. Now, time is an unambiguously Germanic word. It appears with various different spellings and different flavors of archaic English, but forms of this word are very, very old and very similar to the same word in Old Danish, Old Icelandic, and Old Swedish. The next word, and the first one that refers to a specific duration of time, is millennium. This should be one of the more obvious non-Germanic words on the list. Millennium comes from Latin, although it's not actually a classical Latin word. You do find similar words with the ennium suffix in classical Latin, though, like biennium, a period of 2 years, or triennium, a period of 3 years. Mille means 1,000 in Latin, so a millennium is a period of 1,000 years. The root word of the ennium suffix is annus, which means year. This is a common root in other English words, of course, like annual and anniversary. It also appears in several common Latin phrases, like per annum or anno domini. The word millennium first appears in English in the 1600s, specifically referring to the period of 1,000 years of Christ's rule following the Day of Judgment, as mentioned repeatedly in the book of Revelation. It comes to refer to any period of 1,000 years shortly thereafter, which is generally how we use the word today. And some bonus facts about the word millennium. You can remember how to spell it correctly if you remember the etymology. Mille has 2 L's and annus has 2 N's. Because millennium isn't actually a classical Latin word, both the Latin plural millennia and the English plural millenniums are correct forms. I happen to think millenniums sound stupid, but it's not wrong. Let's move from 1,000 years down to just 100, a century. I suspect most of you will also recognize that century is a non-Germanic word, and of course it comes from Latin just as millennium ultimately does. Centum is Latin for the number 100, and in classical Latin, a centuria was a group of 100 of something, especially soldiers. This is where the word centurion comes from, the leader of a Roman centuria. The Romans didn't use this word to refer to a period of 100 years, though. They had another word, saeculum, for that. The word century in the various Romance languages comes from this Latin word, not from centuria, interestingly. It seems that century began to refer to not just 100 of any old thing, but of 100 years specifically, sometime in the late 1500s. This is when you start seeing things like the 5th century in the modern sense of the 5th period of 100 years after the birth of Christ. So just to update the score, that's 1 Germanic word and 2 non-Germanic so far. On to the next one, down from 100 years to just 10, a decade. Starting to sound like a broken record here, but you should probably recognize that decade isn't Germanic either. In fact, its origin goes all the way back to Greek rather than Latin. Decas means a group of 10, usually soldiers or ships in classical Greek. Now the word did get Latinized to decas, and then comes through French to arrive in English as decade in the 1600s. Both decade and century were used in English with the phrase of years for a long time before the words themselves soaked up that meaning and made the distinction redundant. Alright, let's get even shorter, from a decade down to just a year. Now, year is, like time, an unmistakably Germanic word, and just like time, year traces all the way back to Old English and shares the same root as the word in all the other olds. Icelandic, Swedish, Danish, Frisian, Dutch, Germanic, Gothic, they've all got a word that looks something like year and refers to the amount of time it takes the Earth to go around the sun. The word year is literally older than dirt, which doesn't appear in English until the 1500s. Did I ask for your opinion on my language jokes? Survey says... Moving on. So we're at 2 Germanic words and 3 non-Germanic. Down from a year is a month. Month is also very Germanic, and as you may already know, is closely connected to the word moon. Of course, this makes sense. Many ancient civilizations demarcated time by the cyclical phases of the moon, so in the earliest sense, a month was the amount of time between new moons. Now, telling time accurately is a little more complicated than that, so a month now has a fixed number of between 28 and 31 days, and we don't worry so much about what the moon's doing, but 1,000 years ago, the connection between moon and month was an obvious one. Now, if you're overly educated, you may know that the word for month in Latin and Greek, mensis and mes, look curiously related, and they probably are. Ultimately, both the Germanic root and the Greek and Latin could go all the way back to the Proto-Indo-European root me, meaning to measure. Latin and Greek, though, both have unique words for the moon deriving from light, luna in Latin and selene in Greek. Tie score, 3-3. Now, the obvious place to go from month would be to week, but let's take an unnecessary intermediate step just for fun. What's that rather antiquated word for a 2-week period? That's right, a fortnight. This is also very Germanic. It's a contraction in Old English for 14 nights. Fun fact, there was also a similarly derived word for a week, a sennight, but that particular word hasn't survived as fortnight has. Apparently, ancient Germanic civilizations reckoned time by counting nights rather than days. The ancient Roman historian Tacitus wrote extensively about various Germanic tribes, and in chapter 11 of his work, he notes that they, quote, nec dierum numerum ut nos sed noctium computant, and they don't count the number of days, as we do, the Romans, but nights. To them, Tacitus says, nox ducere diem videtur, that is, day follows night rather than the other way around. 4-3 Old Germans leading Old Mediterraneans. Half a fortnight is a week. This video is already pretty packed with information, so I'm not going to say too much about this word here, but suffice it to say for now that a week has a much murkier and much more interesting history than month or day for that matter. I mean, think about it. A month and a day are pretty universal, because they correspond to the observable cycles of the sun and the moon, but the division of days within a month isn't tied to any celestial phenomena. A week is kind of an arbitrary distinction, and as such, different cultures had different conceptions of a week. Anyway, the word week is probably Germanic in origin, although some have suggested it's connected with the Latin word vicus, which means a turn or a change. This is the same word as the vice and vice versa, incidentally. The word week also seems to have the same meaning in its various Old Germanic forms, although it's hard to say exactly when a week referred specifically to a period of 7 days in Germanic languages. It's definitely being used that way in the Old English of the 13th century, but it's possible that the Germanic world got the concept of a 7-day week from the Romans, who got it from the Christians, who got it from the Jews. I'm not sure exactly how to score this one, so I'll just leave it off the board. From a week, then, down to a day. Is day natively Germanic or imported? I can see people struggling with this one because it's a very short and very common word, which means it should be native. But Latin for day is dies, which looks awfully similar. So which is it? Okay, Rufus, is day a Germanic word or a Latinate word? Show me Latin! Yeah, it's Germanic. Just like time, year, month, and week, day has a very similar form across all the different branches of Old Germanic languages, although nobody is completely certain about how to trace day further back from the common Germanic forms. The D at the beginning is fairly inexplicable, for example, but it's definitely not connected to the Latin dies, which traces back to a root meaning shining. So 5-3 Germans. Down from a day to an hour. This is one of a great many English words of Latin and French origin that supplanted an early native Germanic word. 1,000 years ago, our Germanic language ancestors used the word tid for hour, actually sharing the same root as time. After the Norman French dumped all their vocabulary into English after 1066, English picked up the Old French word for hour and has used it ever since. The French word traces back to the Latin hora, which refers to 1/12 of daylight time as it does in modern English. Greek also has a connected word, hora, which refers to any time period dictated by natural phenomena, like a season, for example. 5-4 Germans. And finally, we can talk about minutes and seconds together because they have similar origins. Now, if you think about it, the words for minute and second are almost certainly going to be relatively recent inventions because minutes and seconds are arbitrary divisions of time that aren't connected to easily observable phenomena like the sun and the moon. That means that these small divisions of time were probably concocted by scientists and mathematicians, which means the words probably come from Latin or Greek, and all of that is completely right. The word minute comes from the Latin verb minuere, which means to make smaller or diminish. Minutus is the perfect passive participle, an adjective meaning diminished or divided. Now, the ancient Romans didn't have the concepts of minutes and seconds as we do today. They used words like momentum, moment, or punctum, point, to refer to short amounts of time. They'd say wait a moment rather than wait a minute. An ora minuta, a diminished hour, starts popping up in English with the current definition of a 60th of an hour all the way back in the late 1300s. But for several centuries, the whole phrase minute of an hour was used rather than just the word minute, which doesn't become standard until the 1700s. The word second just refers to a further diminishing of a minute. Secunda means following or next in Latin. So you take an hour and you make it smaller, you have an ora minuta, then you take that and make it smaller a second time, an ora minuta secunda, or a second for short. Now, second isn't quite as old a word as minute, but it still goes all the way back to the 1500s. Bonus fact. An official second, as measured in the international system as the duration of 9,192,631,770 periods of the radiation corresponding to the transition between the two hyperfine levels of the ground state of the cesium-133 atom at a temperature of 0 Kelvin, was only established in 1967. So, 2 points for non-Germanic there at the end to give us the final tally. Germanic origin, 5 words. Non-Germanic origin, 6 words, with no final decision on week. So, Old Germanic words for observable natural phenomena, new fancy Latin words for stuff made up by eggheads. Par for the course, really. Okay, I think that's plenty of etymological explication for today. Now what? Can't argue with the board. See you next time.